I'd like to tell you something that might seem extreme, but it's part of my story, and I've made peace with it. Well, sort of. I've been obsessed with death since I was 2 months old, though I was considerably older when I figured that out. And with that obsession came a big dose of anxiety. I'd like to tell you how I've learned to deal with that. When I was 5 years old, I began kindergarten. And for years, I had yearned for that milestone, since daily accompanying my mother to the school when she dropped off my brother and 2 sisters. I loved their teacher, Sister Jeanne, my namesake, and I couldn't wait to be part of her class. She had shown me a great deal of affection and made me feel that she was eager to have me as her student. She was a very loving nun who adored children, and I couldn't have been happier. Until that day, a fire engine drove by the school with its siren at full volume. I rushed to the window to see that it was speeding in the direction of my house. Now, it didn't matter that my house was over a mile away and that it was made of all brick. Didn't that help the 3 little pigs? But I was consumed with fear that it was my house it was going to and that my mother was in danger. That was my first panic attack. And I've suffered from panic attacks my whole life, though I didn't initially call them that. When I was little, I didn't know what that feeling was that I felt because I never told anybody about it. I just suffered through the black cloud that would envelop me and concluded that I was prone to these episodes of fear because I was very attached to my mother. My father had died in a car accident when I was 2 months old, leaving my mother with 4 very small children. And I lived in fear that she would die and that we would all be sent to an orphanage. However, I imagined that when I became an adult, this feeling of vulnerability would disappear, and that panic attacks would become a thing of the past. But they weren't. They followed me like a shadow, always there but not always visible. When I began teaching high school about 15 years ago, I was startled by the number of students who admitted to having panic attacks and who spoke freely about them. It's as though a cultural shift had taken place, whereby panic attacks had become part of the adolescent lexicon. I imagine it was the pharmaceutical development of anti-anxiety drugs that kind of pushed this to the forefront of society. The first time I ever spoke about such experiences wasn't until I was in college. I serendipitously met someone who was talking about her anxiety attacks. "What are those?" I asked her. When she began to describe what I had been wrestling with since kindergarten, I was floored. Here was someone who was not embarrassed to admit that she had episodes of full-blown panic. She was smart, she was funny, and very likable, and she wasn't hiding her weakness. When I shared with her that I had similar experiences, it was transformative. I wasn't alone, I wasn't insane, and she and I could laugh about the awful nature of these experiences. My private burden had lost its shame, and I felt such relief, but I still got the panic attacks. So it's important to clarify that these episodes were not that frequent. I could go a year or 2 without feeling intense anxiety, and I probably can count the number of such episodes I've had during my lifetime. But that didn't take away my fear of their recurrence. I dreaded their return. However, as I became older and more introspective and more independent, the anxiety seemed to recede to a safer distance. I felt I was older now, and I had dealt with my demons. But then, a number of years ago, my mother got very sick, and all my anxiety came back like a tsunami. Her dementia made me realize that my assumption that I was in control of my life was an illusion. So back to therapy I went, and when I had my first session with the new therapist, I told him that I wasn't interested in taking medication to quell my anxiety. I wanted to learn strategies. And he said to me, "You are hardwired for anxiety. That's not going to work for you. You need to chemically calm yourself down." So I thanked him, and I left before the first session was over. I then was fortunate to find a therapist who was willing to work with me, who would help me manage my agitation. And I was very grateful for that. However, I sensed it wasn't enough. I sensed there was this underlying issue, something almost primordial that was fundamental to my fears, and I needed to face it. I've known for a long time that I have an acute fear of death. It's pretty obvious since I think about it a number of times each day. And in many ways, those episodes of panic felt like a death to me. This profound sense of isolation and separation from everyone and everything around me. Kind of like that. But intellectually, acknowledging that death haunts me hasn't been sufficient to lessen its grip. I knew more was needed. And just when I was at the peak of emotional exhaustion from taking care of my mother and witnessing her demise, I came upon this quote from this well-known Buddhist nun named Pema Chodron, who said the following: "If we're willing to give up hope that insecurity and pain can be exterminated, then we can have the courage to relax with the groundlessness of our situation." I'd like to repeat that. If we're willing to give up hope that insecurity and pain can be exterminated, then we can have the courage to relax with the groundlessness of our situation. Give up hope? Relax with the ground opening up beneath me? Could she be serious? If there's one feeling that people who experience severe anxiety would admit that they share, is the intense desire to flee from it. Keep busy, turn the TV on, call a friend, go for a run, anything to get rid of the terror. And logic would lead us to search for ways to exterminate pain and fear, not give up hope that it can be eradicated. We don't want to ever feel those feelings again. Just about this time, I remembered a book I had read by Alan Watts, in which he talked about the law of reversed effort, also called the backwards law. And there are a number of examples in nature that demonstrate this law in action. For example, when we hold our breath, we actually lose it. And if we're swimming and we're caught in a riptide, and we thrash about and we try to stay afloat and fight to stay afloat, we'll actually be pulled under. And if we're very tired at night, we try really hard to fall asleep, we'll be kept awake. So applying reversed effort to panic attacks would mean that when one comes on, we let it be. Or, as counterintuitive as it may seem, we invite it to stay. Now, there are many Buddhist stories that address this approach to dealing with our demons. One of the most popular ones is the story of Milarepa, the ancient Tibetan yogi who lived in a cave. At one point, he was visited by many demons, and no matter what he did, he couldn't get them to leave. So when, out of exhaustion, he finally accepted their presence and invited them to stay, they all fled. All except for one, the most ferocious demon of them all. No matter what Milarepa did, he couldn't get him to go. So, out of desperation, Milarepa put his head in the demon's mouth and said, "Okay, eat me." And the monster disappeared. Accepting insecurity and psychological pain, my demons, in many ways runs counter to my personality. I think of myself as a positive person who likes to fix things and resists defeat. I have found great comfort in living with the illusion that I can control everything, although I don't think my husband finds too much comfort in that. But I have begun to understand that when it comes to the existential challenge of living fully while knowing we are vulnerable and mortal, we need to accept rather than resist the fragility of life. I imagine that as a child, I linked my father's death to the larger threat of uncertainty that underlies all of life. And that vulnerability has worked as a kind of undertow that at times tries to pull me down. The worst thing I could do is swim against the tide. So, how do I remain calm and let panic run its course? One strategy that has worked is to stay with the feeling of anxiety when it comes and evaluate its intensity. On a scale of 1 to 10, how strong is this attack? Where in my body do I feel the discomfort? As Pema Chodron has said, get curious. Do what it takes to keep the anxiety in the forefront rather than flee from it. Talk about it. Write about it. Breathe deeply and focus on the breath. Accept it. Welcome it. Welcome it. You might be thinking, why on earth would I do that? Because it diminishes its power. Try talking to it as though it's a person who's come to visit you, albeit without an invitation. But you can say something like, "Hello, I see you're here again. I've seen you before, and I know you'll just come for a short while. I can make room for you because I know you will be leaving soon," or something like that. The point is to remember that panic attacks are temporary. They come and they go. So why not let them run their course and remind ourselves that they're just here for a visit? A friend of mine kind of characterized it in a different way. She said, "You have so much in your life that makes up who you are. You can make room for anxiety. It's just a small piece of your identity." So, I've often wondered what my life would be like if I didn't have anxiety. And as much as I dislike it, I know that it has helped shape me into an empathetic person. Sometimes I feel almost like I don't have skin over my nerves, but that has had its benefits. I might feel pain intensely when it comes on, but I also experience profound joy. Thank you.